Welcome to Combat Theory Presents, a bi-weekly podcast about all things martial arts, fight science, and combat sports. Your host is Paul, the evil Professor Antonelli, and our newest episode starts right now.
All right. What's up, Rich? How are you today?
Doing well. How are you, Paul?
I am living La Vida Loca, which apparently means the wildlife.
It does. I've seen Ricky Martin in concert. My first concert.
No
I'm
way.
not lying.
How was it?
It's amazing.
It was amazing. How old were you?
I was 8 or 9.
I like how this devolved into a terrible. We just went from
Welcome back.
We love talking about Muay Thai and MMA, but I was at a Ricky Martin concert when I was 9. Who'd you go with?
It was like my mom's friend and her daughter.
And they were loving it. They were like, we're loving it. All right, so Rich, we have somehow succeeded and filmed 2 episodes,
We're
started to
staying
film.
disciplined.
Yeah, we're showing up, and I'm amazed by it. What are we talking about today?
Today is about judging. As much as we can talk about judging without boring everyone.
Yeah, that is ultimately my fear, is that people are going to be like watching the episode later and being like, "This is the most." If you guys are driving while listening to this episode, I hope that you have a warm cup of coffee in your hand, and I hope that we don't disappoint you. A guy on YouTube once said that he watched my videos to go to sleep, and I think he meant it actually as a compliment. He said I had a very soothing voice, and I still think of it as a positive thing. Like,
You should.
I was like, oh, that's
it's a
great,
little
dude.
backhanded, but I think that's.
I don't
that's
know,
just
man.
true.
I don't know. You know, I've listened to a few podcasts that put me to sleep too. Okay, so could you explain to me kind of, where are we going to jump off here? What do you think is the best place to start?
So I've been wanting to do this. We've been talking about this. Just because coming from a coach who is now judging often, I've learned a lot, and I think there's a lot more to learn, and there's just never enough discussion. And we hear that all the time, like, oh, no one really goes out and talks about judging or talks about reffing, any of the official stuff. But if we can just open the discussion about it and then start to, define things a little more and give perspective, I think we'll have a lot more opportunities for growth, whether it's you guys are regional or someone across the country hears it, just to help the sport a little.
I think, too, as from a coaching perspective, I think that, when we first started becoming friends, you were judging a lot, and I saw you at events judging. And we would have conversations where you would kind of enlighten me on, like, things that maybe I never thought about before. Mm-hmm. Like giving the judges something to score and, like, forcing breaks so that there's, a breakup in action. And we can talk about that more later on probably. But
sure.
I don't know. We probably should have looked this up on what percentage of fights go to judges, right? But I would say that I have been at, especially amateur events, where it's like, every fight went to decision, and then I've also been at amateur fights where every fight was a finish, right?
Yeah.
So it is something that is like,
there's some data for, like, obviously, like events like UFC, or you could probably find some one championship data on that. But I would say it's going to be anywhere from like 40 to 60% of an event will go to decision.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but I have a feeling that in my library in the other room, I actually have the UFC's like they do like a yearly or bi-yearly journal or something where they give all that information.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm sure I have it.
Yeah.
I just failed to look that up, which I think is amazing on my part. I'm so proud of myself.
Well, we have
right
so
now.
much notes that as I was reading the notes, I was like, man, we're missing a lot too.
Oh my God. Okay.
It gets, I encourage, so if you enjoy this discussion, if you really want to know more that we don't cover, I really encourage everyone to go to the organization that you're going to fight for, read their rules, read their judging criteria, because there's a lot of information out there. A lot of it's going to be repetitive for certain sports. But again, as we'll go through some of my notes, we'll see small differences make big changes when it comes to the fight.
Yeah. So when you're Rich, when you go to judge, can you explain to me kind of just like how the day starts for you and kind of like how that, what is your role throughout the event and stuff like that?
Yeah. So basically, for judging, just like all the other officials. You have to show up early.
Okay.
You have a certain call time. If again, you can find this online. Certain organizations, they'll have like a layout of what the judges are expected to do.
Okay.
And one of the ones that really was a game changer for me was eating a light meal before you show up to the event.
Okay.
And it actually says that in some of these
really
kind of judges. Like,
no kidding.
Yeah, and it's a really good tip because I had read it a couple times and it was just like, yeah, I'm going to be there for 8 hours. I'm going to eat a huge meal before I get there.
Yeah.
Or you make the mistake of not eating before you get there.
Okay.
Yeah, so to really kind of just start with that, I'll get a light meal.
Okay. Let's start with a very light meal.
I'll get a light meal, maybe a coffee drink, something small in milligrams of caffeine, but enough to kind of like keep me perked up. Because
Sure.
you're going to be sitting around probably for 2 to 3 hours.
Minimum. Yeah.
Before the fights actually start.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So then you sit down, you have your fight card. They're going to have, depending on the sanctioning body, the scorecards will either be labeled for you or you'll have to label your scorecards. You write your name, you write the date, you write what judge number you are. There's 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
And you go through and write who's in red corner, who's in blue corner. Even if, obviously, if these fights finish by KO or submission if it's MMA, you still want to write out your scorecard because you're going to have to score something even if there's a finish. We'll talk about that maybe. It's not a big detail, but it is something. So you have your scorecards. You fill them out. The fights begin. Basically, your role is to sit ringside. There's going to be 3 judges. All 3 are sitting ringside. You are not to be bothered, and you are not to be distracted. So basically, you can't be talking to anyone. You can't be eating. You can't be on your phone.
You need to be awake.
You need to be awake, focusing on the fights. They even state in some judges' orders to, no one can be within 2 feet of you.
Okay, fair.
Which at some of these shows,
Impossible.
impossible.
The audience might be within 2 feet of you.
I've had that happen, where they make it over the barricade. To really kind of get a little more specific, you're really not supposed to talk to anyone except for maybe the head official and the referee. You can speak to the ref about maybe you saw a foul that didn't get called, or maybe they called a foul that you saw didn't actually happen. You can kind of have that communication with the ref as a judge and to the head official.
Yeah, I think that's an important point because sometimes when I'm refereeing, I feel weird about talking to the judges because I don't want to like bother them because I know that they're not to be bothered, right? So sometimes like when I have an issue, I'll go to like whoever the head official is, but sometimes the head official's on the other side. They didn't see it. Like it's hard to, see it from every angle sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, when you're scoring, that is a 10-round must system. Most people do what's called a 10-round must, right?
Yeah. So especially here in like the Western world, when we get into some of the other scoring criteria, we'll talk about scoring a fight as a whole. But yeah, pretty much here in the U.S., every fight is on a 10-point must system.
Okay, could you explain what that means? Because I think there's people that probably have heard that hundreds of times, but they don't understand what that means.
So that's why I wanted to do this episode, because I feel like most major organizations really drop the ball on educating the fans. Now, if you're a hardcore martial artist like you or myself are, where we've been doing this for most of our lives,
too long.
These things are very like understood and common to us.
Yeah.
Maybe our coaches taught them, or since we're coaches, we went out and sought the information.
Or someone, you listen to somebody else's podcast or video, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. You know what I mean? You did your film study.
So 10-point must system basically states that whoever wins the round gets 10 points.
Okay.
The loser gets 9 or less.
Okay. So that would be a 10-9 round.
10-9 round, which is the most commonly scored round. This is where you get your decisions from.
Okay.
So typical fights are 3 rounds.
Sure.
So you score each round by round. You specifically are told not to think about what happened in the last round and not to think about what may happen in the future. You're literally told to score what you see.
From bell to bell.
From bell to bell, each round is essentially a separate fight.
Yeah.
And I think this is where a lot of fans kind of mess up.
Sure.
Where they go, man, he was rocked at the end of round 1, And then going into round 2, they're already looking at him as a loser. So everything that scores against him, even if he is scoring, they're immediately thinking like, oh, he's done.
I think something that I have been guilty of, not judging, but as a fan watching, or even as a coach, is that he goes into the corner, and he's in the corner, and he looks like he is struggle bussing. And I started to develop a perception of, all right, he was really struggling in the corner, right? When in fact, whatever happens in that corner should have no effect on scoring. And I've also had instances where, like, I decided to put a no swell on my fighter, and then later on I lost the fight, and I was like, man, I wonder if my decision to no swell my fighter, which if you don't know that means I'm sorry. I don't have time to explain that today. We have a lot we're to talk about. I wonder if that affected the way the judges saw the round or the next round or whatever, which it should not.
It shouldn't. And again, some organizations, when you look it up, guys, I'm not going to sit here and tell you every sanctioning body's take on it, but some organizations will tell you the damage scored in the last round does not carry over into the next round unless the damaged areas get worse.
Sure.
So if you bust my eye open in the first round, now the next round starts. It's a whole new fight. So that basically is just the starting point.
Yeah. Now, if it starts to get bigger or it's bleeding more significantly,
then it's new damage.
That would be new damage. Okay. So
10-9.
10-9 is most common.
Most common score. What I like to talk about, because again, this may seem simple to a lot of people who are in the sport, but I still hear from professional fighters who kind of have some poor misconceptions on what decisions are. So, the types of decisions. You have your unanimous decision.
Okay.
This is all 3 judges score it the same way.
30, 27.
Not even that.
You know.
They all score it for one corner.
Okay.
So, I could be 30-27. You can say 29-28, and the other guy can say 29-28. But
we all agree that red corner was the winner.
Red corner's the winner.
Okay.
That's a unanimous decision. A split decision is when 2 judges see it one way and 1 judge sees it the other.
Okay.
And that is a weird one that, to me, makes just total sense. You know, the judges are split, but we have a winner.
Okay.
In order to get a winner, you need at least 2 judges to agree.
To agree, yeah.
What I hear from fighters sometimes, or, casual fans and stuff, is they'll watch a fight and they'll hear unanimous decision and be like, oh, it should have been split. He won the second round.
Yeah, no, that's not what that means.
No, he won the second round, but...
What they mean by split is that 2 of the 3 judges agreed, but because that, they didn't all agree. They were not unanimous. They were split in their decision.
Yeah.
Yes, I get you.
Yeah, and I just find that hilarious because it's like you wanted the other guy to get a split decision because he won 1 round.
Yeah, no.
He lost 2 rounds. That's unanimous. So, again, unanimous decision. All 3 judges agree. Split decision. 2 judges agree. 1 does not. Now, beyond that, you get some more rare cases like majority decision.
What does that mean? That's a good one. What is majority decision?
Majority decision basically says 2 judges agree and 1 judge scored it a draw.
Okay. All right. Cool. That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. How do they score a draw per round?
It can happen. It's happened to me, unfortunately, a couple times.
Okay.
And all judges, just like all fans and all fighters and all coaches, we don't want draws.
Okay.
We want a winner. Even if it doesn't go your way, you want it to be decisive. A draw is just kind of an ugly situation. But the most common way to get a draw, which has come up a couple times recently for me, say I'm red corner, you're blue corner.
Sure.
I win 2 rounds, 10-9. You win the 3rd round, 10-8.
Okay.
Now it's a draw.
On your card.
On my card,
On your card, okay.
If all 3 judges see that,
yeah,
then it's a draw.
Across the board.
Unanimous draw.
If we had and I'm going to say this, but I'm devil's advocate a little bit here because I feel like there's 2 sides of this.
Sure.
In a very close round, is that scored as in a draw round? You saw the round as a draw. Would that be scored as a 10-10 round?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless there's a point deduction.
Okay, sure.
So
like
then
foul
say
or whatever.
The round would have been 10-9.
But then or 10-10.
No, let's say it would have been 10-9.
Okay.
You were beating me.
And then I fouled.
Then you fouled. Now we have a 9-9 round.
Okay. That would be 9-9 on the whatever because they deducted that 10-point must. They deducted 1 point.
Correct.
All right, let's not get lost too much in the minutia
Yeah.
here. But it is.
lot.
I will say that on the few occasions that I have judged on paper, I get a little bit like, oh, I want to make sure I scored that right, you know. And again, most rounds are 10-9. Now, when you have a count, like an 8 count, so a guy gets knocked down or a standing 8 count, that does change the score, correct? Typically,
Yeah.
okay.
So we'll get into that in a second.
All right. Okay. Cool.
As far as like rule sets and scoring
All right,
criteria.
Cool. So we'll talk about that more.
That 10-8 is a very important number when we
10-8.
start talking about judging.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. We'll head that way.
Yeah. So just to finish up on this, unanimous draw is when all 3 judges see it as a draw. Then you have your majority draw. 2 judges see it as a draw. 1 judge gives it to a fighter. But you need 2 judges to score a winner. And then you have your split draw where it's 1 judge, 1 corner, another judge, another corner, and then the 3rd judge sees it as a draw.
All right. So can we just name those across again without explaining them? You have majority decision.
So let's start
Unanimous.
from the top. We have unanimous decision,
Okay.
all 3 judges. Split decision, 2 judges see it one way. Your majority decision, 2 judges see it one way, 1 judge sees it a draw. Then you have your different types of draw: unanimous draw, majority draw, split draw.
Okay. And how common do you see draws at fights?
Not common at all.
Not common.
I would say 1 for every 150 fights.
I'm not a
Or more.
gambling man, but if I remember correctly, the last time that I looked at this on one of the betting websites was that if you bet $100 on any draw in the UFC, it paid out $5,000. So that's a significant.
It's also a dumb gamble.
It's a terrible gamble, but it does give you an idea of how willing they are to accept $100 for a draw, because if they lose it, they have to pay you $5,000, right? And if they win it, they get $100. So that it is super, super rare. All right, so we're going to talk about different scoring criterias in different organizations or different rule sets. Yeah, where did you want to start?
So I think it'd be probably best to start with kickboxing.
Okay,
because I think at least my generation, probably your generation too, getting into martial arts probably meant you started with some form of kickboxing, and K1 was super huge.
Sure.
I had insomnia as a teen, so they always played like K1 reruns and ISK reruns on ESPN channels, so I got really exposed to K1 from that.
K1 rule set, okay.
Love K1.
So are we going to talk, when we're saying kickboxing, you know, K1 is the rule set that I guess people are actually, I would say that I'm a little older than Rich, not significantly, you know, it's a little bit. The first kind of kickboxing I ever saw was like the long pants, which I think is it's one of the dark moments in our sport that we like to pretend never happened. I don't want to talk. I saw a guy the other day that was talking about kick counts, and I was like, never again, dude, never again.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's actually a good point you said, that the K1 rule set.
Yes.
So K1 was an organization, still is an organization that came out with their own rule set that hadn't quite been used before.
Yes.
And now other organizations have adopted
their K1. The K1 rule set revolutionized striking martial arts, and even early MMA. You could make an argument has influences, and they are using some variant of the K1 rule set with added MMA rules. You know, obviously not UFC 1 through 5. There was no rules or whatever, but you know, once the organizations like Glory and you know, even Pride and some of the early organizations, they started to use some version of that rule set. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what. Explain to me the K1 rules initially.
So K1 as an organization, right? They also sanction themselves essentially, so they oversee everything.
Sure.
So their rule set, I'm going to simplify because this is not a rule set podcast. This is a judging podcast.
Sure.
But it's important to know the rules, especially when we compare it to the next organization, which is Glory. So K1, you're allowed to punch, you're allowed to kick, you're allowed to knee. Clinching is up to about 5 seconds.
Okay.
There's no sweeps.
Okay.
Now, in other organizations that have K1 rule sets,
they added in or allowed.
They have some kind of wavering on some rules. But that's the general ideas. You can punch, kick, and knee. No sweeps, limited clinching.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Were you allowed to
elbows?
No elbows in K1 style. Okay.
Yep.
What is so? Okay. How are these matches scored?
So it's a 10-point must system.
Okay.
Round by round.
All right.
Now, in K1, it's 3 judges. You're going to. It's not open scoring.
All right.
There was a time where they would do some tournaments open scoring, but they kind of played with it. But for the most part, it's close scoring.
Okay.
You don't know the decision until the end of the fight, which is common, right? The scoring criteria, what I think made K1 unique when it first came out, as you were speaking about with some of the older styles where they had a kick count. You had an X amount of kicks you had to throw per round, or certain targets were more. K1 said, look, we don't care about what techniques you use. We just want these things.
Okay.
So this is the scoring criteria. You have number of knockdowns. That's number 1.
Okay.
So the amount of knockdowns you're getting in a round should be putting you way ahead.
Yeah.
Number 2, this says, from all the scoring criteria I can find on K1, it says presence or absence of damage.
Okay.
And basically that really what you're looking for is presence of damage.
Yeah.
I think because a lot of it's being translated from Japanese, which is
sure.
It has this kind of, you'll see it in some of the translations. Yeah. It's a little weird on the wording.
Yeah.
But presence or absence of damage is number 2. Then number 3, you have number of clean strikes. So again, they don't have a striking hierarchy like what we'll see in traditional Muay Thai.
Sure.
A punch, a kick, a knee, if it's scoring, that's what we're looking at. Just how many of these scores are you scoring?
Sure.
And then aggressiveness.
Okay.
That's their scoring criteria.
Just to go back 1 second, when you say that the common thing is not to have open scoring, could you in one sentence explain what open scoring is?
Open scoring means everyone is aware of what the score is after a round is completed.
Okay. All right. So after round 1, I can maybe look on a screen or something or whatever. I had to listen, but I can see that.
You'll see all 3 judges
scored. And although K1 did play with that just briefly, that is not, the vast majority of organizations we're going to talk about today, if not all of them, are going to be close scoring.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So what I like to point out is this number of knockdowns.
All right.
Because we're going to see this as a common theme going forward with these other striking organizations. And I think that's really important to note, especially when we start talking about MMA, because there's this discussion of 10-8 rounds and such in MMA and what could be considered a 10-8 round.
Yeah.
So in the sport of kickboxing, K1, even in Muay Thai, if you score a knockdown, then we're going to, as a judge, score that a 10-8 round.
Okay.
The only time we won't score that a 10-8 round is if the person who got knocked down was absolutely dominating up until that point.
All right. So you wouldn't have to.
You may not score it a 10-8 round if you feel the other fighter was they use this in caps, absolutely dominating.
God, this gets complicated. Let's say absolutely dominating. I'm already giving the guy a 10-8 round myself. I'm producing a 10-8 round. I'm dominant.
You're on your way. You're on your way of winning the round decisively.
Yeah. And then I get clipped in the last 10 seconds. Mm-hmm. Then I went from having 10 to you having 8 to then you at least increased by a point, right?
Yeah, I'm actually winning the round now.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is, again...
It would go from 10-8 my side to 10-9 your side?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. And
so it's a 3-point swing, basically.
Basically, yeah. And that's huge, right?
That's a game changer.
And that's why I really wanted to point out this criteria of number of knockdowns.
Okay.
Because I feel when it comes to the MMA side of things, as we'll get into their scoring criteria, they kind of look at knockdowns as important, but not the end-all, say-all.
Yeah.
Which, again, when we get there,
of course.
We'll talk about it. But these organizations... they really favor knockdowns because outside of a judge's decision, how do you win? You win by knockout. Well, what's the step before knockout? Well, knockdown. So they really favor those. So again, we'll talk about 10-8s in a little more, but I just really wanted to point out that number of knockdowns. Then we have, let's just call it damage, presence of damage. Then you have number of clean strikes. Now, most fights are going to get decided on damage and number of knockdowns.
Sure.
The number of clean strikes, those are close fights where neither guy is really getting hurt.
Yeah.
You do, as a judge, need to be paying attention, kind of like you kind of keep in your mind almost like a knob, like who's got the most strikes right now.
Yeah.
Now, keeping track of who's got the most strikes, also who's doing more with those strikes. You kind of have to keep that in mind as well.
And I think that's without data or without AI or without, something that's actually tracking that, it's like that's a very hard...
It's very difficult.
It's really, really hard. And I think that's why, that's lower on the criteria because it's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
And then number 4 for you is aggressiveness.
Yeah, and aggressiveness, basically, if it's coming down to that, that means neither of us have a decisive number of clean strikes. Neither of us have done damage, and there's been no knockdown.
Sure.
A judge is literally based on who's pressing forward. This doesn't mean you're landing. This means like you're throwing, you're probably missing.
Yeah.
You're still making the guy back up, react, but nothing's really happening.
This is why I've heard from a lot of people that they feel like it's very hard to draw for you to decide a single round as a draw, because even at the end of the day, one person has to be, even if they missed everything.
Yeah.
One person's walking forward, the other person's walking backwards at some point. So I've heard a lot of people say that it's nearly impossible to draw a single round for a judge. But obviously it does happen. Yeah. Okay, so that's K1.
K1.
Pretty simple.
Pretty simple. Again, it was a big game changer for kickboxing. It really dominated the entertainment world.
Yeah, and I think it also, like, when it comes to, I think there's a lot of guys that were probably doing more traditional martial arts, but striking arts like Taekwondo and karate and stuff like that, and saw K1 and saw an avenue for them to kind of like, obviously there was not a whole lot of money then, but it was an opportunity for you to kind of like take your sport into a competitive endeavor. So you see a lot of like the guys that were coming out of more traditional martial arts getting into K1.
Yeah, I think that was the goal of K1, was to incorporate all these different martial arts.
Yeah.
But even the playing field with their rule set and their scoring criteria to where it doesn't favor one style.
Unlike maybe some other organizations we can talk about a little bit later.
Will do.
But okay, so K1 in a way gives birth to a lot of organizations, but Glory is probably the kickboxing organization that, I don't want to say today because maybe not today, but probably the last 10 years.
They took the lead.
Yeah.
With
for
some
striking
of these,
arts.
With some of these Japanese organizations, you see some business
Yeah.
deals go through that don't work out. And, so basically, K1 isn't popular anymore.
Sure.
But Glory comes around.
Okay.
And it's got a very similar feel to K1, but they do have some minor changes.
Okay, so what are those?
So, Glory Kickboxing, you still can punch, you can still kick, you can still knee. The clinching, they will allow you to clinch to strike, but they're looking for immediate strikes. They're not allowing pummeling. If you kind of put a K1 fight next to a Glory fight, you'll see the refs are on them a lot more about grabbing. There's even a famous fight with Artem Levin, I think it was against Simon Marcus, where Artem's continuously grabbing, continuously getting warned, does get a point deduction at one point, but even post-point deduction, he's continuously grabbing, and they really they kind of hound him, as opposed to what you would see in K1 or other organizations. So they're very anti-grabbing, very anti-clinching. Another interesting rule they had, no standing 8 counts. So in K1 and other organizations, say we're fighting and you're rocking me, I'm blocking, but I'm not really doing anything. I'm not trying to fight back in a sense. The ref can get in the way and start doing an 8 count. And Glory, they don't allow that. Basically, if a ref stops the fight, he's stopping the fight. If you get knocked down, he'll do a 10 count, but there's no standing 8 count when it comes to Glory Kickboxing. Which, for a fighter, it's very unfortunate because you're either forced to take a knee or get knocked down. To where in other kind of organizations, you can kind of rely on the ref to give you a chance to recover and fight back. You're losing the round, but you're recovering and getting back to it.
I guess I have very mixed feelings about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, this is why it's so important to talk about it, because I think I'm guilty of it myself. Some coaches will just be like, "Oh, we got you a kickboxing fight." And then you just put them in an organization that it's like labeled as kickboxing. But which kickboxing rule set are we utilizing?
Sure.
And then again, what scoring criteria? That's something I didn't do until recently. And I'm learning a lot of organizations regionally can't send me a scoring criteria that I'm going to be, acceptable for.
I guess we can probably talk about that more later, I guess, maybe, or why these things are so important. How many judges do they have in Glory typically?
So it's not uncommon to see 5 judges
really
at a Glory show. Yeah,
no kidding.
Yeah, they do a lot of shows overseas in like kind of like the Dutch countries and stuff like that, and they're more likely to encourage 5 judges as opposed to 3.
Wow. Okay.
Which I love.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the more judges, the better, right?
You get a more fair sense of what's happening.
Fair. Yeah. What is the criteria for those fights?
So again, number of knockdowns. That's number 1. They state it as overall impact, not damage. They call it overall impact. Again, language is really important when it comes to kind of like the officials. That's why if you go to these websites, you can go to the Glory Kickboxing website, you can go to the K1 website, you can look up like the rules, and you're going to see a lot of text. There's a lot of text, and that's because language is so important to everyone have an understanding. So when we look at scoring criteria, it's short criteria, but they use certain language like overall impact.
Okay.
To where K1 is going to use damage.
Sure.
After that,
now when they say impact, do they mean like it hit hard impact, or they mean impact of like how it affected the fighter?
So there's many ways you can kind of define
impact.
Look
at that, yeah.
And we have damage as part of impact.
Sure.
So if I get punched and my eye swells up, that's damage. That's impacting the fight. If you caught me hard to the liver and I kind of there's no welt,
it affected me.
It affected.
It affected. I've been infected by that punch.
I mean, it feels like an infection. Yeah. So again, maybe you kicked my leg. There's no welt. There's no physical damage, but you can see that it's making me change how I fight. It's making me go southpaw. It's making me limp a little. Maybe when I throw punches, there's less steam on. So that's what they mean by overall impact. And this is going to come up a little bit later when we talk about the unified MMA rules.
Okay.
Number of clean, spectacular techniques. That's their number 3 scoring criteria. So it's not just number of techniques, it's number of clean, spectacular techniques. And again, this is for an entertainment standpoint. If we're in a close fight and we've landed the same amount of strikes, but I threw an axe kick and a back kick, I'm, according to their criteria, should be in the lead. If it's close, but I've thrown a couple more clean and landed a couple more clean, spectacular techniques, I should be leading the dance.
My friend Asa Tenpao fought in Glory, and he's very flashy. He does a lot of spinning things and a lot of whatever. And I think that you could see that some of the fights that he won, he looked, I don't want to say prettier for the lack of a better word, but he looked. He pulled off really impressive things. That's why they called him like the American Ninja. Or whatever, right? But
and again, this as a coach, you got to look at your fighter and says, where does his style play best?
Yeah.
Which rule set? So after that, then you have your number of standard techniques.
Okay.
And then the final one, aggressiveness. Again, most fights are going to be decided on number of knockdowns, overall impact. If we're having to look at this spectacular technique criteria, it's a very close fight. And then again, we have to keep in mind, well, it's a close fight, but he threw, a tornado kick that landed off, the liver.
This is also, I'm gonna correct me if I'm wrong, but this is unlike K1. Glory had the ring generalship, right? Like, who was the general of the ring was the thing I always thought was a funny way to say it, but
it is.
That's ring dominance, correct?
Yeah. So again, your language, right?
Yeah.
That's really important when it comes to these criterias and stuff. When we speak of ring generalship, again, they have aggressiveness ahead of that, and then it's ring generalship.
Yeah.
So basically, if it's down to ring generalship, nothing has happened. No action has actually happened. Nothing has landed, and neither of us have really thrown much. What they really...
we looked at each other really dominantly.
Yeah. And here's the thing. In most kickboxing fights, because I try to find examples, most kickboxing fights, most Muay Thai fights, there's action to score.
Yeah.
I've only found examples of this in MMA fights, where not a lot happens and they probably go down to that final scoring criteria.
Interesting.
A recent one was Rose Namajunas versus Carlos Esparza.
Okay, yes.
Right.
Rose did almost nothing.
Mm-hmm. And then on the other spectrum of that class, that division, we had Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou.
Yeah.
And I got to witness that one live, and boy, was that boring. But again, not a lot was thrown. I think it literally had the lowest amount of strikes thrown in a heavyweight fight, and I don't think anyone got caught clean.
No. It was one of the most boring fights.
So aggressiveness is scored ahead of that, and then ring generalship. So again, if we're down to these scoring criteria as a
you're
judge,
in the minutia, you're in the mud,
and the fighters, I think, need to be looked at as like, this is your guys' fault.
Yeah, I blame you for this problem.
Yeah, and I hate this. As a judge, I want, just like everyone in the crowd, I want a knockout. I want an easy night of work. I don't want to have to, in my mind, do this martial arts math.
Yeah.
I want it to be simple.
I think this is where I'm going to get in trouble for this one. I think this is where a lot of jiu-jitsu tournaments get into when they have the advantages, where they stalled each other out so much to the point that nothing happened. So they're like, oh, we'll give the advantage to this person. And I know that gets very hotly contested. That should not be the case in kickboxing, especially. I mean, there should be something that you hopefully should have done, you know. All right. You have a note here about scoring a 10-8 round.
Yeah.
Did you want to hit on that right now? How do you feel about that?
So, yeah, I think this is a good point to kind of start talking about the 10-8 a little more. So a 10-8 round is one of those things in kickboxing and in Muay Thai is very common because, again, that number one scoring criteria of knockdowns. If I score a knockdown in a fight, I should be winning that fight because, again, the number one way to win is by knockout.
Yeah.
But if I get a knockout, then I just straight up win. So then there's the knockdown.
Sure.
Okay, so now I scored one knockdown. That's a 10-8 round. Say it was even, or maybe you were slightly ahead, or maybe I was slightly ahead. Doesn't matter. You have to be massively dominating that fight to not get a 10-8 round scored against you.
Okay.
So I knock you down. That's a 10-8 round for me.
Sure.
We go into the next round. It's a whole new fight now, right?
New fight.
You have to score a 10-8 round if you want to win. Because the next round, whoever gets that 10-9 will be the winner.
We would, let's say you're 10-8.
Mm-hmm.
I essentially need a 10-8 to draw at the second round.
Yeah.
And then that third round becomes the definitive
Who's going to
round.
win this round? If you just win it by 10-9, I can win the next round by 10-9. I win the fight. You have to really work your butt off to get that 10-8, or set up a clean shot, which takes work. But you really have to go for it at that point.
Yeah,
you can't,
and you're already if you got 10-8 the previous round. If you got 10-8'd the previous round, you were probably you're coming into that round probably slightly depleted, and maybe probably beat up a little bit at this point. I hear you.
So it's detrimental to understand the scoring because I don't think it gets preached enough. But if you're down 10-8, you're down those 2 points. 2 points is massive on a decision scorecard. So you're down those 2 points. You have to at least make those 2 points up in the next round to even, like you said, get a draw.
Yeah.
Then you have to win the third round. So in my mind, you might as well just go for broke.
Yeah, you're way behind now.
You might as well just go, okay, 10-8's whatever. I need a 10-7 or a knockout.
So then what would lead me to like a 10-7 round?
Typically, 2 knockdowns.
Okay.
Or maybe I was beating you so bad that it was going to be a 10-8 round, just on the merit of how badly I was beating you.
And then I got a knockdown.
And then
again.
you got knocked down. Okay, now you don't need the 2 knockdowns to make it a 10-7. But again, you have to be absolutely dominating and
have a
score
knockdown. This is one of the okay. So we keep saying score knockdown. I think this is important. Mm-hmm. Score knockdown is also, at least in this organization and most organizations, a standing 8 as well. So I don't have to be down. I just have to have the judge or the referee so concerned about my health that he steps in and starts an 8 count. Right? Yeah.
And again, that's a really important thing to bring up when we compare K1 to Glory. To where Glory doesn't allow standing 8s. Now, I have seen it. I've even been there live when the refs have messed up. And again,
started a standing 8.
This is important for coaches and fighters to understand. Officials do mess up. Again, we're just talking about 2 kickboxing organizations, 2 rule sets. There's plenty of different rule sets these referees and judges get taught to work with. Sometimes they mess up. Sometimes they do something that's more common in another rule set than another.
I have personally refereed an event, a fight where I started an 8 count, and somehow not 1 but 2 of the judges missed the 8 count. Yeah, so I've been there. It's happened where I started an 8 count, I finished the 8 count, and then there was some debate later on because of the scoring, and they're like, well, it couldn't have been scored that way because there was a knockdown in the round, and then. I've only been refereeing for about a year now, maybe 2 years if you count PMT, but as a full contact for about a year, and I went back and looked at the video because even I was worried. Was my 8 count not visible?
Right.
What was it about my 8 count that didn't score? And then I watched it and I was like, It happens. People make mistakes, right? I think my 8 count was okay. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. But when you're judging, if you look away for 10 seconds, that might be an 8 count.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, legitimately.
Yeah, I mean, again, mistakes are made, and not every person doing their job is doing it the best it can be done.
Sure. And even the best judges, best referees are going to have bad rounds.
Yeah.
Or bad fights, for sure. Okay, so that is kind of, K1, Glory, and then a lot of the other organizations that do kickboxing, amateur and professional, typically when you ask them what their rule set is, a lot of times they will say K1 rules, or they'll say, well, we do Glory rules. But if I were you and you're a coach and you ask someone what the rule set is and they say it's Glory rules or it's K1 rules, I would then immediately ask them for a scoring criteria, because just because they say it's K1 rules doesn't necessarily mean that it's K1 scoring.
Yeah.
Or just because they say it's Glory rules doesn't mean it's Glory scoring. So, and you, as Rich alluded to earlier, you're going to run into some organizations where you ask for a scoring criteria. They don't have anything printed, which is unfortunate, but it is factually the case. Yes.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because it seems so simple. I mean, again, if you're doing K1 rules, why would you not do
just
K1?
Copy. You just copy paste.
Yeah, it's not crazy. I mean, when we get into the MMA rule sets, they have the unified rules and they have the global rules. That's pretty much it. You can choose which one you think is better. In the United States, you can only use unified. So I think that's something that's kind of lacking in our sport of kickboxing and Muay Thai, is that kind of everyone's on the same page kind of thing.
I think we could definitely talk about that because I have a lot of thoughts about that when we start talking about more of the MMA scoring. But we're going to travel now from K1 and Glory into the stadium or the more traditional Muay Thai scoring.
Yes.
Okay. Talk to me about it. I know that you have a lot of feelings about this.
So this is one of those topics where the Muay Thai community, not just ours, just as a whole, across the world. The Muay Thai community has a lot of debate on, because there's the purists who love the stadium Muay Thai, the traditional Muay Thai, and there's those who, more or less because of K1 or because of these other Muay Thai organizations, favor the entertainment style.
Sure.
So when people say, why hasn't Muay Thai become more popular It's which kind of Muay Thai are you talking about?
Yeah.
So when we talk about stadium Muay Thai, it's very different.
Sure.
And I did a lot of research.
Okay.
I tried my best to come up with a list of scoring criteria, just as I did with the K1 or the Glory. But here's the thing. A lot of these stadium, like Lupini, a lot of them are officiated by Thais.
Yes.
I was watching one podcast trying to get more information. It was a UK official who had been trained by a Thai official. And he said out of every official in the Lupini Stadium, only one of them kind of spoke English.
Fair.
So there already is an issue, a language barrier.
Yeah.
So explaining this complicated scoring criteria with a language barrier probably causes a lot of confusion. And again, it's a very cultural kind of scoring.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to sound like like egocentric or like America or whatever. That's not my intent here. Okay, but typically with K1 and Glory, a lot of times the referees are speaking in English during the fights. I feel like, right? Even when I see them in Europe, it's like,
Even their Japanese referees and stuff.
Yeah,
they can.
I mean, I'm not. They're not having full conversations, but
sure,
they're like
they're using the command
fight,
words.
stop, break. Okay, makes sense.
So I think that's a big issue with the traditional style of ties. There's just no education to Westerners, those who are probably gonna be the ones who can financially blow these sports up.
Yeah.
So then you have your entertainment style Muay Thai. And that's going to be, in the U.S. we have like Lion Fights and Triumph. But stadium Muay Thai is very complicated. And I had a couple resources if you guys are interested.
Please.
You can definitely hit me up for the exact links. But the two best explanations I could find.
Pause. If we're going to hit you up on Instagram, would that be your private Instagram or would that be your professional Instagram?
Ooh, let's do professional.
Okay, and that is?
At.
Okay.
Florida.
Okay.
PKB PNT.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there underscores there?
There are underscores in between those words.
Oh, my God. Okay. I'm going to read that to you. It is at Florida _PKB _PMT.
You got it.
Cool. And obviously, you can always hit us up at Combat Theory on Instagram.
Also, you can just Google it.
Hit that Google.
If you just look up Muay Thai scoring criteria, Evolve. Evolve Martial Arts is a gym and an organization, and they had a great article on traditional Muay Thai scoring. But even in these articles, they make a point of saying this is very confusing and very complex because of the rules of traditional Muay Thai. So I'll get into that in a second. The other source is there's a woman named Sylvia Von Douglas, and she's been doing a lot of covering like Golden Age Muay Thai, and she fights. She's the number one foreigner with the most fights in Thailand. Recently, I think her number's up to almost 280 fights, which is a lot, especially for someone who's not from Thailand. And she does mostly stadium Muay Thai, and she has an article where she had an official break down one of her fights, which covers kind of the scoring criteria. But even then, that gentleman who is an official stated it can be very confusing and complex, and there's a lot that's going on in a judge's mind for traditional Muay Thai. So, I'll just kind of point out some of the highlights. Again, I didn't have a definitive, like, this is number one, this is number two. There's speculation on these things.
Okay.
But there is a striking hierarchy.
All right.
There's certain strikes that score and certain strikes that don't score unless. There's always this, like, asterisk with certain strikes that don't score.
Mm-hmm.
But basically they're looking for kicks and knees to the body. They're not going to score your punch. They're not going to score your elbow unless it cuts. They're not going to score your punch unless it staggers, wobbles, or drops an opponent.
Yeah.
Again, it gets a little complicated. Your kicks can score if they move the person, whether they block them or not.
Yeah.
If it lands clean to the body, that's very, very good.
Yes.
There is a striking hierarchy.
I actually used to teach this to some extent, and it was on the shin check.
Yeah.
So everybody, I think most of my listeners probably know or are confident and they know what a Muay Thai style shin check is. So in Thailand, and the way that I was taught initially was that if you checked a kick and you looked solid in the check, right? So your balance or posture was not affected. That was you blocked that kick.
Yeah.
If I shin checked and I even just like hopped back a little bit, my posture's fine, but because I hopped back a little bit, I was affected. My posture or balance was affected. That would be a scoring kick, and that's one of the things that I've taught a lot, because when I teach Muay Thai, I want people to understand how shin tech is looked at.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand that typically in the United States, that would not be the case.
Yeah.
If I check the kick, whether I hop back or didn't hop back, it's a check.
Yeah.
But in Thailand, I remember very distinctly being taught that if my posture was affected, that would count against me. And that I was not. Let me clarify that I was not in Thailand.
Yeah.
But I was being taught by Thais that had moved to the United States initially. So my first Muay Thai instructors were a little closer to like that, I guess, original Thai source, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
This second generation of instructors we have in the United States are mostly Americans that learned from Thais, and now they're teaching, more Americans, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's no knock on Thailand.
No.
Sport.
It's just it's a different
and
it's a different understanding.
It's ingrained in their culture. They've been watching it and scoring it certain ways. And some people, even in this Sylvia Von Douglas article, they talk about the fights tell a story.
Sure.
And it's not just about who wins by hurting the other guy. There's certain techniques that they really favor. And again, if you want to educate yourself on that, go for it. I think it's huge. If you are one of those guys who wants to go to Thailand and fight in the stadium,
I would encourage
super
it.
honorable.
I would
Love
encourage it.
Yeah.
I think that you should. Why not? In the same way that if you love Greek culture, you should go take a vacation and go to Greece. I think that's a great idea. Learn about the culture there, right? But there's also a Greek culture in the United States, right? But I think that's really, I think what you're talking about right now is super important for people to listen to, because one of the conversations that I get into a lot as an official, and I'm sure that you probably have gotten in this conversation before, is that people will be commenting on an event here in the United States and maybe commenting on the scoring and then say the following phrase: well, in Thailand, they score it this way. That's great, but it's not the same sport. I hate to say that.
Yeah.
In the same way that, soccer in the United States, right, is looked at very differently than, European League soccer. And even Thais. I went to there's a really amazing workshop / camp they do in Vegas every year. That's like it's a smaller camp, probably like 50, 60 people. They usually bring in a bunch of Thai coaches, and it's like over a weekend. And I went last year. I'm hoping to go this year coming up. And their position, the Thais' position is that the best Muay Thai in the world happens in the stadiums in Thailand. And when you can no longer compete at that level, then you go on to fight in Glory or K1 or some of these
As
other
they
organizations.
call it, entertainment Muay Thai.
Yeah.
So there's this divide with those type of fighters where they have stadium or traditional Muay Thai and
entertainment Muay Thai.
Now, the money for most fighters is in the entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, in their culture, winning those stadium titles means a lot more, and you might not be compensated with money, but you're compensated in other ways within your team, within your community and such, winning these stadium titles. Right. So I just want to also point out a couple things, because we didn't get to really talk about the number 1, 2, 3 and the
please.
But the judging is also done quite differently in Thailand.
Okay.
There's these unspoken codes where round 1 isn't necessarily scored.
Yeah, that's a betting round.
Yeah, and a lot of times let me start off with saying this. Again, it's all complicated. They have scorecards for Stadium Muay Thai.
Okay.
But the fights are scored on a whole. They don't score them round by round as we do. They use a scorecard more as a reference than as opposed to a definitive scorecard that they're going to hand
they turn
an
it.
official.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I get you.
So it's scored as a whole. They basically just say red corner or blue corner wins. But they do use a scorecard, and a lot of the times round 1 is scored 10-10.
Yes.
Then the more heavier scored rounds are 2, 3, and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then round 5, depending on what happened in 2, 3, and 4, could either be very boring or very exciting. And again, this is part of their culture. It's how they view fighting. It's how, there's a big betting. Betting's a huge part of these stadium fights.
I feel like and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouths, but I was going to say, we talked about this a little bit
probably
before.
put a lot of words.
Yeah. That's why I try not to. The way that has been explained to me many times when it comes to the betting in Muay Thai, and obviously you have to understand that, typically the stadiums are run by the military. Mm-hmm. Okay, the Thai military typically runs the stadiums, and then there is a big component of betting in the stadiums, and a lot of Thais will tell you, and Thais have told me, that betting has ruined Muay Thai in Thailand. And I don't know enough about it to say that. But what I will say to you is that because of the betting, like you said, the first round is considered a betting round. And if I'm one of the fighters, I need them to start betting because I get paid a percentage of what is bet, essentially. Mm-hmm. This is my understanding. So in the first round of a Thai fight in Thailand, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want you to hurt me because we need to have a fight and we need to have betting. By the end of the first round, the betting typically ceases, and then the second, third, and fourth round are heavily contested.
Yeah,
we're fighting. Okay, now what you alluded to was the fifth round is debatable, and this is how it's been explained to me. If I dominated you rounds 2, 3, and 4, mm-hmm. it is kind of mutually agreed upon by the two of us that I have won the fight. Yeah. I'm way ahead, and I don't need to hurt you anymore, and you don't need to hurt me anymore because this is our career, and we might fight next week.
Sure.
Or we might fight 2 weeks from now because Thai fighters fight hundreds of times.
Yeah, I think the average is 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I don't want to get hurt. You don't want to get hurt. So you beat me up for 3 rounds, and now I'm going to let you kind of, move around with me and whatever, and maybe we'll show off a little bit, but I'm not going to show off because I'm losing. You're going to show off a little bit, but you're not going to hurt me in the process. We have an understanding. Now, that's not to say that it is a work or that it is fixed. That's not what I'm implying. Although, due to the nature of betting, there have been, and I'm sure there will continue to be fights that are works or are fixed or whatever, right? Yeah. So that is what you have to understand when you're watching a Thai fight. Because a lot of times when people are watching Thai fights, the first round, it's kind of boring because it's a feel-out round. It's a betting round. Don't really want to hurt you. And the fifth round, after we've had a really aggressive 3 rounds, the fifth round can be kind of boring as well. And people are like, a lot of Westerners look at it and go, this is kind of lame or whatever, but they don't understand the intricacies of the betting environment.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah, and I think that's a big reason why it's not popular here, or probably will never become popular, just because it's so culturally different. I don't know a single American fighter, unless they've been ingrained in that Thai lifestyle, that really wants to fight that way.
And also, it's my understanding that the stadiums are now trying to eliminate betting from the stadium. So it'd be interesting to see what happens.
I looked, again, in my research, I wanted to find as much as I could, and you can't almost find anything that doesn't at least mention the betting aspect of Muay Thai.
Yeah.
Which is just, again, it's not a thing here. You don't go to the State Athletic Commission and they mention the betting for the judges. That's just not what we do.
The only thing they mention is that you cannot have a financial stake in any fight.
Yeah. So that's stadium Muay Thai.
Sure.
Now let's talk about entertainment Muay Thai.
Okay.
This is where probably most of our listeners are, if they're watching Muay Thai, they're watching entertainment Muay Thai. You're not going to have a 5-round fight unless it's maybe a title fight. There are going to be 3-round fights. They're scored round by round.
So today, when we talk about entertainment Muay Thai or entertainment kickboxing, who is the dominant organization?
Probably my favorite organization.
Okay.
Which is One Championship.
All right. I ask why it's your favorite.
They're just the best. Again, I'm not talking about their business logistics. I think again, if you're picking apart any aspect of
business,
martial arts,
politics,
there's always going to be some negative
how they've done the
somewhere.
fighters, whatever.
Yeah.
We're really talking about judging and scoring.
And I think a big part of that is the fan experience.
Okay,
because fans always either agree or disagree with the judges.
Sure.
They're also judging the fight as as you watch it. You might not know these fighters, but you're picking a guy to win. Why didn't he win? Or I'm so happy he got the decision.
And just to clarify real quick, we're going to talk about one championship, and they do have kickboxing. They have Muay Thai. They now have grappling, and they also have MMA.
Yes. So
you might watch a show. You might watch, if you never watched the one championship fight, they're on Prime. They're on Amazon Prime, right? They have a lot of content on YouTube, especially. You might watch a fight, a show, and they might have all 4 of those things on a single show.
Yep.
Which is also, I think you pointed out to me before, is an amazing way as a referee or as a judge to watch the intricacies of how each one looks. Obviously it's pretty hard to miss the difference between Muay Thai and grappling, but there are intricacies with kickboxing and Muay Thai that are very different.
Yeah.
But I think the average fan sometimes doesn't see that, or they don't get that.
Sure. Yeah, so that's one reason why I love one of many reasons. And as a coach, you have a stable of athletes, and now all these athletes are represented in one organization where you may have a couple Muay Thai fighters, a kickboxer or two, an MMA guy, and your jiu-jitsu coach.
Yeah.
Right? And now they all have an option of where they could compete. They can all make money doing the sport they love. If it's a multifaceted athlete, they have multiple avenues, as we see with guys like Asa. Right?
Sure.
He's over in one.
Sure.
He could do kickboxing. He could do Muay Thai.
Sure.
He can do MMA.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not uncommon to see the athletes do that, and I love that because it gets to show their skills in different ways. What another thing I love about one is with their kickboxing and their Muay Thai scoring criteria, it's the same. They make it very easy to understand, and it's easy. I haven't seen very many controversial decisions in one. When I'm watching a fight, whether I'm invested as a fan or invested as I want to look at this as a judging perspective, I'm pretty much on par. I don't really see, there's some close fights, but you're going to be like, I'm going to give it to this guy because of one of these deciding factors.
I think that's, I think what you pointed out there for a moment is interesting, because when you're watching a fight as a fan versus watching a fight as an official versus watching a fight as a coach, you're really looking at 3 kind of different. You're watching 3 different fights, right? And if we talk about film study a lot, because I'm a big fan of film study. I want to be a better referee, so I've been watching a lot of one championship lately. Just where is the ref in position to the fighters? How did the ref handle this one particular situation, right? And it's hard for me to, look at the fight from a fan perspective when I'm doing that. And in fact, I would say that from a fan perspective, it's unenjoyable to stare at the referee the whole time, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to get better at your sport, in the same way, if you are hoping to be a better judge and you're watching one championship, I would encourage you to mute the volume.
Yeah.
Because the commentary you would not hear during a normal fight, and frankly, the commentary is bias at best. And if you're trying to judge it from a fair perspective and you're listening to this guy in your ear tell you, that really hurt, that does not help your development as a judge.
No.
What is the scoring criteria for kickboxing and Muay Thai and one championship?
Again, they do the same criteria for their Muay Thai, for their kickboxing, and what's cool about one is they do little gloves Muay Thai.
Yeah.
So they have MMA gloves, but it's still their Muay Thai rule set.
Yeah. Small glove Muay Thai.
Small glove Muay Thai.
I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm
a big fan of it. So, number 1, knockdowns.
Knockdowns, okay.
Let's make it easy for everyone. If you're knocking the guy down, you're winning this fight. Again, 2 knockdowns, most likely getting a 10-7 score. 3 knockdowns in a round, we didn't cover this because we're not talking about reffing so much, but 3 knockdowns in a round will grant a TKO.
Okay.
4 and about will grant a TKO. This is for K1. This is for Glory. This is for most striking rule sets.
If you get knocked down 3 times, the
in
fight
one
is
round,
over.
It's over.
If you get knocked down 4 times in a fight, the fight is over.
And then, of course, there's some changes when it comes to tournaments.
Yeah. And I will tell you too that as a referee, that's something very hard to keep track of in my head.
Sure.
Because if I counted you twice in the first, and then you had an okay round in the third, and then I go to count you twice in the third, if I counted you twice in the first, second round was clean, and then I counted you twice in the fourth, the fight is over.
Yeah.
Third. Anyway, I hope people
right.
listen to that and understood that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a 3-round fight. four counts in that 3 rounds. The fight should be over. I will say this to you as a judge, as a referee, as a coach. I have seen a lot of fights where there have been 2 in the first and there's been 2 in the third, and it was not called.
Yeah.
And you, the coach, if that's your fighter, you need to
fight.
stop the fight.
Yeah.
100%.
And again, officials, they deal with a lot.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you make mistakes, right?
I'm not here to defend all officials. They've made mistakes. It's their fault.
In the NBA, the statistic that I love to go to, because the NBA referees are considered the best referees of any sport because they see the most games. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So because like if you're, I hate to say this, if you're a football referee, you might referee 18 games a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are a baseball, umpire referee, you might referee. I think it's like 40 or 50 is what they say. And then if you are an NBA referee, you might referee like 100.
Oh, wow.
Or something crazy, right? Because there's so many games and there's so many leagues and there's not that many referees. So the referees see a significant number. So like most referees in other sports, they say like, well, NBA referees are the best referees, right? And they're proven to only get 96% of the decisions right. Right? And they have the highest percentage of decisions right because they see the most problems, so they know how to call it, right? So if you imagine that the guy that sees hundreds of games a year gets 90% of calls right, and then the football referee that saw 17 games in that year gets a lot less percentages right because they had less experience, right?
Less repetitions.
Less repetitions of action. So that's, and then if you go down to your average referee, they might have, I think I have ref full contact probably about 50 fight total, right? In like a year.
Well, that's it's a lot of work and there's a lot of stress involved to protect these guys. And it's common on a card to say there's 20 fights. Well, you're gonna have 3 refs, and you guys are changing. So you're not reffing 20 fights.
Wherein a NBA referee might be in the whole game.
The whole game. Yeah. So going back to the scoring criteria, knockdowns number 1, super important. What are we here for? We're here to strike. How do you finish knockout? Well, if you don't get a knockout, we go to decision. Knockdowns is the number 1 scoring. Then we got damage, and they put in internal, accumulated, and superficial. So they want you to know we're not just talking about physical damage. We're talking about internal damage, as we spoke on before, and accumulated damage. Again, maybe there was already a cut from the previous round, but it's now accumulated to something bigger.
Yeah.
So, again, very basic. Then you have number of clean strikes. Again, if it's getting to this point, it's a very close fight. And that judge needs, in some form or fashion, to keep track of who's landing the most. They don't get fed that information, as you pointed out before. This is something you have to, as a judge, keep track in your mind. And then the last one, aggression and cage/ring generalship. They put those 2 in there together, as opposed to other organizations, because, again, if you're coming down to that last scoring criteria, this is a boring fight, and not much has happened to where you can make an official judge. So if you feel like, the aggression is what made him, quote-unquote, win this fight, or his ability to keep the center, take the center, is what protected him enough to win this fight. Again, very few fights are scored on that. Again, I tried to find some examples. I watched a bunch of fights. I was Googling my butt off to find.
Show me some ring generalship.
Yeah,
fights.
like where did these fights get separated or judged by this criteria? Very rare. It's very rare. And if it is happening, again, a lot of times they're not talking about it. on the commentating.
This is a fight about ring generalship.
Right. They might bring up, he's controlling the ring,
Yeah.
but there's so much action happening that you can definitively score the fight based off of
Makes sense.
damage or knockdowns. So yeah, that is their kickboxing, their Muay Thai, and Small Gloves Muay Thai scoring criteria. It goes across all three because the rules are so similar enough to where the scoring criteria can match all those rule sets.
And also, to some extent, and I hate to say this, because I really think One Championship does a very good job when it comes to the in-ring stuff. They are standing on the shoulders of these other organizations like K1 and Glory that kind of created game plans and also had massive problems, right? And you can see all these were problems and bankruptcies and all these other things and
mafia deals.
Yeah, fans upset about stuff, and they kind of were like, well, what works and what doesn't work, which is ultimately, I think, really important.
Yeah.
And I don't want to harp too much on it as well, but we'll talk briefly about MMA scoring because we are in the world of MMA.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of evolve to that point, right?
Okay.
So we started with kickboxing. We talked about two of the most popular organizations. Then we got into Muay Thai, which allows a lot more weapons, right? Of course, there's clinching, sweeps, elbows, things of that nature. And then we get into MMA.
Yeah.
So what I would consider kickboxing and Muay Thai, those are like 3D sports.
Okay.
Right? MMA is a 4D sport.
Okay.
Because now you're adding this aspect of ground fighting. Now.
Doesn't make it better. It
No.
just makes it different.
Different.
Okay.
Very different. And so before we get into the scoring part of it, I want to kind of defend these judges a little bit.
Okay.
Guys, when you're watching fights at home, you have the best seat.
Yeah.
There's no question about it to me. I've been to pay-per-view events. I've been to these big stadiums. I've been to regional shows. And, of course, I've judged fights. Ringside is not the best seat. It's a nice seat. It's a very nice seat. But it doesn't show you the fight as well as when you're at home from multiple camera angles with a team of people in a truck who are pointing out which is the best angle.
And also crisp sound.
Ooh.
All right? Because, like, when you hear a shot clip a guy, like, pow, you might have heard that in live, but they have, like, a condenser microphone that's zoomed in.
Yeah.
And, they isolated that sound to get that sound. Sometimes when you're ringside at big shows, it's so loud, you don't hear any. You're hearing so little that I know a lot of officials that wear earplugs because it's just so loud.
Yeah. And to that point, a lot of that is just like the fans, the audience, right? And they say for judges to never score a fight or be swayed based on the audience's noise.
Sure.
They have to make this point because, we're humans, and if you score a punch on me and no one cheers, but then I score a punch on you and 40 people erupt.
Yes. And I think that's the biggest BS that's put out there because I can't tell you how often I've been ringside and I have seen, on my head, I'm not officiating, I'm not judging, I'm just kind of like in between. Sure. Whatever, I'm on a little break and my head is down and you hear like the crowd lose its, and you look up and you see everyone around the ring also looked up. All the judges, everyone looked up. So, the crowd does play at least.
It can play.
At least an unconscious effect on everyone ringside, right? But I think that what you're saying is very true.
Yeah.
It's very easy for you to be at home watching a fight and getting 3 different angles and
beyond 3.
And be zoomed in, and you can see stuff. When you are ringside and the fight's on one side of the cage and you are on the other side, you might not see anything.
Yeah.
And the ref might be standing between you and the fighter.
We were just at the IKF recently. I was judging, you were reffing, and I told you after the fight, I was like, man, that whole round, I didn't see any action because you were in my way.
Yeah.
And you were doing your job right.
Yeah.
You were in the position you needed to be. It's just based on where the fighters took the fight, I could not see.
I think as a referee, that is something that you try to be aware of, is that you have to try to move sometimes, not because you need a better view, but because you've been standing kind of in the same position for a while.
Yeah.
And the people behind you need to be able to see what's going on, whether that's the audience or that's the judges.
Sure.
And that is something that I think the best referees struggle with sometimes, because they want to be in that position that lets them see exactly what's going on. And
But you also want to give the fighters a fair shake of getting the judge the fight scored properly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tough game, and again, that's why I am defending judges now. Again, they can make mistakes. We've all been there, done that. But you can only score what you see. And I learned this very early on. As a coach, this was very eye-opening for me, because I realized where my fighter is in the ring really matters to the judge's perspective. If you're in the fight and you're just in one corner the whole time, there's a good chance one of those judges is not seeing the action. There's 2 judges who can see it, and again, you need 2 judges' agreeances to get a win. But if that third judge isn't able to see, you don't know really how he's going to swing it.
Fair.
And it's difficult. And, I mean, legitimately, there's probably been 3 fights in my mind where I had to go look back, and I'm like, did I miss this?
Yeah, what is it that I didn't see that they saw?
There was a fight early on, probably the first one that really made me, like, lose sleep. And I was watching the fight, and basically it came down to the last round. We're in the final 30 seconds. It's an MMA fight. And a gentleman is on top, half guard, was momentarily landing punches, but then the other guy catches a Kimura. So when we get into the scoring criteria, we can use this example again. So the gentleman's got a Kimura. From where I'm sitting, this looks tight. This looks like it's a genuine submission attempt.
He is having to defend this.
On the verge of getting his shoulder broke. So I just scored the fight for the guy who has the Kimura. It's a close fight. Came down to this last exchange. I give it to the guy who I thought was about to finish the fight. Going back and watching the fight, I get the camera angle. And that Kimura was super loose. Almost not locked in at all. But from where I was sitting,
it looked tight.
It looked like a fight-ending Kimura.
Yeah.
And I could have gone to the grave saying, no, that was a tight Kimura, but had I not gone back and looked at the fight, video, I can be like, ugh, I didn't realize how loose that was.
We should hashtag film study on that one. And you studying your own fights, too.
100%. Everyone needs to be just watching all the tape. I watch my pad work.
Yeah.
I'm not watching necessarily my fighter. I'm watching me holding pads going, oh, I stepped to the left too much.
Or my pattern should have been a little tighter. Or
sure,
whatever.
There's so many things that can go wrong.
What rule set do you use in MMA?
So in our country, we have the unified MMA rules.
MMA rules.
In 2017, they've made it basically law that every sanctioning body uses the unified MMA rules.
And some people will really hate this, but the unified rules were actually developed by the New Jersey Athletic Commission.
And I think this is a step in the right direction of, like, let's have one rule set that we can all agree upon is the best way to grow a sport, right?
For sure.
But is it the best scoring criteria? This is the debate.
What is the scoring criteria for the unified rules?
So for the unified rules, we have effective striking / grappling.
Okay.
That is number 1. Then we have effective aggressiveness. That's number 2. And then the last one, cage / ring control, also known as fight area control, depending on what type of stage you're performing on. So again, we go to effective striking / grappling. This is where majority of the fights should be decided. And they break that one criteria down into 3 separate divisions.
Okay.
So effective striking and grappling, we're looking at impact, dominance, and duration. Now, this is something that a couple years ago I started really paying attention to, because as I'm watching these UFC fights, they use the unified rules, right? You watch these UFC fights, the commentators cannot stop talking about damage. Damage is, you hear it all the time. If you follow me on Instagram, my personal account, I probably post it at least once a month where I'm like, oh, DC said it's all about damage. What does he know? Like, I call these guys out because it's misinforming even myself for a long time.
It's not damage, it's impact.
And the reason why
dominance and duration.
Right. And the reason why we're using the word impact, because grappling typically doesn't cause damage. As we saw in the previous scoring criteria, damage was often the number 2 scoring criteria. Mm-hmm. And those are all striking, right? Because damage is a product from strikes.
Sure.
If I put you in a choke, even if I squeeze as hard as I can, your head's going to turn red, and then it's going to go back.
Yeah.
That's it.
Really, the only time that you see I guess, visual damage is when you broke something.
Yeah.
So they broke the arm.
The fight's over.
Then I see damage, but it doesn't matter anymore because the fight is now ended.
Correct. I mean, if there is an injury such as bad as that, a dislocation or something, and they're allowing the fight to continue, it's not going to last very long. I mean, we've seen it recently with TJ Dillashaw. His shoulder came out of place like 4 times, and I mean, that was just abysmal. You know,
I saw a fight with Cheyenne Velismus.
Oh yeah,
where
I remember I was there live for that.
I think she dislocated her elbow. Yeah,
slamming the girl.
Yeah, and then she tried to continue the fight, and they
Hilarious.
were like, "No."
She won me over as a fan.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
She was arguing with the ref. But yeah, 100%. Grappling does not cause damage. So they use this word impact, and again, we saw that word impact in a previous scoring criteria with Glory. Because they recognized using the term damage, even in striking, doesn't really encompass everything that's happening.
And also, I think that there are cases where there are people that I think the Diaz brothers are always talked about, where they're heavy bleeders, where you don't hit them that hard, but because they have so much scar tissue and they're thin, their skin is so beat up on their face that they start bleeding. Bleeding is not necessarily an indication of impact.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I hate to say that, you know. I think that's maybe why the UFC, or the unified rule set, I should say, tries to clarify that impact is not damage is not impact. They are similar.
Yeah. I want to correct you on that. Unified rules say that. The UFC does not say this. Back in the day, before the UFC, everyone switched over to unified rule set, you would get at the beginning of an event. Unfortunately, it'd be Mike Goldberg. I hate Mike Goldberg, but he would go over the scoring criteria at the beginning of each event, and sometimes before each fight. We don't get that anymore. Instead, we get 5 commentators constantly talking about damage until there's a grappling heavy fight, and then they start talking about control. And again, that's not even stated in here.
Fair.
Ring control is. Fight area control is.
But really, effective grappling goes back to impact, dominance, and duration. Again,
if you look up unified rules scoring criteria, you're going to get a lengthy explanation of these things.
Sure.
And I advise everyone, if you're an MMA fan, even if you think you know the scoring criteria, please go read that. You'll start looking at fights differently. But impact can basically be summed up in how is the fight leading to a finish. If I'm knocking you down, that's causing impact. If I'm making you defend submission attempts, that's causing impact. If I'm shooting repeatedly and you're having to defend my takedowns and that's wearing your gas tank out, that's causing impact.
In that context, the word impact means effectively impacting the long-term duration of the fight.
Yeah.
Right. I think a lot of times people think impact and they think a hit. No.
Yeah.
It's the impact of the outcome of the fight is being affected.
And that's what we want, right? Again, I'll say this time and time again. Unless it's a point style, point Muay Thai, unless it's that, we want finishes.
Yeah.
You don't watch highlights. They're not going to show you the whole 15-minute fight.
I used to say all the time, Muay Thai is knockouts.
Yeah.
I want to see knockouts, right? Like, that's what it should be.
So we want the finish. So, again, the debate is, where does grappling hold its authority in the scoring criteria? Because striking's a lot easier to kind of decide who's winning in the effective striking area. But how do you compare effective grappling to striking when striking can cause physical damage?
Sure.
That's where it takes a lot of knowledge on the judge's part. And this is where I think we start to see a lot of negative outcomes in matches.
Do you think that MMA? Sorry, do you think MMA is harder to judge than Muay Thai? Or
100%.
Because there's so many realms.
There's so many realms. Like I said, it's a 4D fight as opposed to kickboxing. Muay Thai, it's 3D.
I think it's harder to watch.
Yeah,
because if typically when 2 fighters are standing, it's easier to get a good view of both of them.
Space in between them.
When 2 fighters are on top of each other. It becomes so much harder as a ringside official or as a ringside judge to see what's going on, even if you're really close, because action might be happening on the other side of the body that you are blinded to.
Yeah.
You know?
A good way for you guys to know who's judging fights at these UFC events or any event that you're watching, look at the people sitting ringside. It's the guy who's breaking his neck, who's like constantly bobbing and weaving to watch the fight, because once they hit the mat or once they get pressed on the cage, there's a lot of obstruction. And you're going to have to try to find the best angle to put your eyes to see if a knee is landing, whether it's clean or not, whether it's being impactful. Also, to see the defense. You know, it's really tough if you're sitting on top of me and you're throwing these big punches, the elbow's coming back, it looks really vicious, and I'm getting the back point view.
Yeah. It looks like everything's landing.
Everything's landing.
And
but
everything's
then
missing.
the judge over here is going, well, nothing scored.
Dude, missed all that.
He just
missed
has
all
position.
that. It's
He just
embarrassing.
has, so.
But
of course, that can impact the fight,
Sure.
but is it as impactful as one judge viewing it as opposed to another? It gets very complicated with the MMA.
I think also, too, that, like, this is where we have 3 judges, and those 3 judges typically have very bad views compared to the camera crew, and they're not shown. You know, most ringside judges don't have a view of what the camera's seeing.
Yeah.
They don't have a monitor in front of them, and you could make an argument whether or not that would be even beneficial.
Here's a little thing. I've been working to get my pro judging license. It's mostly been MMA that I've been shadowing.
Sure.
And I asked, because I'm learning, I got to know. I asked the other judges who are training me. I said, when the fight hits the mat, this promotion has a big screen up here.
Yeah, can I watch that?
Can I watch that and score the fight off of that? They told me I could. They said, absolutely. How else are you going to see that angle?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And to some people's point, they might go, well, that's not fair. Well, what's fair? Because if I can't
have to see the fight.
Do you want me to score what I think I'm
this
seeing,
is
or do you want me to
where,
score what I see?
You know, Joe Rogan talks about having like 100 having 100 judges at home that are watching the video without sound or something, where it's like they all see the same, they're all seeing the exact same, whatever. But then you get into the bias of the cameraman, right? Because the cameraman is trying to show the most entertaining angle. Maybe that's not showing you the whole fight. Who knows, right? And that is unified rules, which is typically what we see in the United States. Now, outside of the United States, what do we see?
So then you got global rules.
Okay.
And for me as a judge, I haven't got to judge
global
rules.
Mm-hmm.
I've practiced at home for what that's worth.
For sure.
But so global rules, basically, this is what One Championship uses, as we spoke about. They're one of my favorite organizations, if not my favorite. And the reason being is they make it simple. As a fan, you want things to be simple. That way you seem intelligent, let's say.
Okay, yeah.
You know what you're talking about.
It's hard to mess up if it's basic.
Yeah,
I mean, keep it simple.
as let's call ourselves experts.
Yeah,
if
sure.
If we're in a room full of casual or even non-educated whatsoever fans, we sound super intelligent. We can see things a mile before it happens, even in front of a casual. But a casual can say things that we would also say.
Yes, yes.
And
the vernacular is similar. The understanding is super different.
Right. And you want that as a fan. I use this analogy all the time. Football fans are typically more educated than a lot of coaches I've met in the sport of football.
Fair.
Compared to a coach in the sport of martial arts. They may be an expert in one, but they don't know all combat sports. Therefore, they don't necessarily have the best view for MMA.
Fair.
So I like one a lot. Again, global rules. The rule set is a little different.
Okay.
Depending on where you're at, but we're talking about one. One allows knees to the head.
Okay.
And they allow kicks to the head.
Sure.
Of a downed opponent.
Yeah.
To where the UFC doesn't allow that.
And also, maybe I'm jumping ahead. One is scored differently. Still 3 judges, right?
Yep.
Do they score round by round?
No. So that's a big difference when we're talking about judging.
Okay.
Earlier we brought up Muay Thai.
Sure.
Traditional Muay Thai is not scored round by round. It's scored as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Global Rules does. They score as a whole. To where these other entertainment sports will do round by round. I think it works well for striking, but when it's so complex like MMA can be, I think scoring the fight as a whole is much more realistic of finding a winner.
Yeah.
This is where we get a lot of confusion and argument when we talk about like UFC fights where guys are like, how did he win? Well, we're talking the round by round. There's a 10 must system. And again, if you're only limited to what your view, you're probably going to make a bad call here and there on a 10-9 or hopefully not make a bad call on a 10-8.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the global rules, you score it as a whole.
Yeah.
So the beginning of the fight to the end of the fight. It's not
if there was not a definitive winner in the first round, that's not as big a problem because you can see what the story of the fight is or where does the fight head.
And they do heavily favor what happens towards the end of the fight.
Yeah.
Because we're getting to a decision, right?
Yeah.
So we want to how is this going to play out at the end?
Do you think there's a possible danger that means that I'm not paying as good attention in the beginning as I am in the end? And does that matter? Does it even matter?
I think it matters for sure. You should pay attention at all times because imagine the first exchange, you drop me to a knee, and then the next, 14 minutes of the fight
is not a whole lot.
Rose versus Carlos Esparza, So it's really important to pay attention and keep track. So there's scoring criteria.
Go ahead.
For global rules.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little longer than the unified rules, but I think it's a little better. So number 1 is near knockout, near submission. Language is important to where previously in the unified rules, we're talking about effective striking or grappling.
Sure.
To where they say, this is what we want. We want a near knockout or a near submission.
So I hit you, you dropped, I come into your guard.
I continue to punch.
But you recover. That near knockdown, that near knockout.
Yes.
Is still very valuable, which
Super
I think
valuable. In
unified we kind of forget that. We forget that. You know what I mean? Like I hit you, and probably if this would have been a fight, you would have in a striking fight, that would have been an 8 count.
Mm-hmm. And now you're up 2 points.
Yeah, but I missed that completely because the action that happens afterwards happens. Right?
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So near knockout, near submission, very specific on what you're looking for. So if we're fighting now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a 10-8 round, but again, they're not scoring round by round.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just keeping track. Oh, he got a knockdown.
Yeah.
Oh, he got a knockdown and then some additional damage.
Yeah. This guy really had a fight out of that triangle choke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. The near submissions. Again, you have to be very knowledgeable when you're judging MMA.
Because you have to know how much damage they're in.
Right. Not to.
No, I mean, casual fans sometimes would be like, "Oh, that's not that bad," and you're like, "Oh, that's a devastating near submission, right? Like, is that guy's arm going to function?"
Mm-hmm. I mean,
he got out of it, but is it going to continue?
There's submission attempts that I know because I'll be watching fights with other pro fighters and stuff. They don't recognize what's happening. I'm like, "Oh, there's a key lock there," and the guy's like, "Where?" And I'm like,
"Sure."
From the case of Katami. How do you not know that move?
You fight.
There's a lot of viewpoints. So near knockout, near submission, super important. Then we go back to damage, internal, accumulative, superficial. So this, in some ways, may look like it favors a striker.
Yeah.
Right? Because, again, damage is a byproduct of striking.
Sure.
So that should probably tell you, do I want to fight in global rules or do I want to fight in unified rules? In unified rules, I feel a lot of times grappling gets favored more than striking. So where global rules is going to basically say, we do favor submission attempts, but your positioning doesn't really matter much to us unless you're creating damage.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair, because especially if they're going to allow knees to the face while you're on top of a guy, go for it. Create some damage.
You can make the argument, and I think it's been very documented now, that obviously the UFC's origins were in kind of showing that grappling was a dominant martial art, and as that rule set has developed to now what we have is the unified rule set. Obviously, the largest organization that was doing MMA in the United States was the UFC, and they were an organization that were originally designed to prove that grappling was a legitimate art.
Sure.
So their rule set and their scoring criteria evolved from a grappling dominance, which is also why knees on the ground in the unified rule set is not legal.
Yeah,
because it is a fight-ending dangerous shot, but it would not favor most grapplers. Mm-hmm. And you could make an argument, I think, that in global rules, which you see in one championship, it's probably a little bit more geared towards striking arts. I hate to say that.
So you can make that argument,
sure,
right? But
might not be right.
What really matters is the fighter.
Yeah.
how the fighter works the rules. So again, the argument of like knees to a down opponent hinders a grappler.
Yeah.
Unless you're on top. If you're a grappler, you're the grappler.
Yeah. You can put yourself
you're
in a position
afraid
to
of
control
shooting
and
and getting
beat the crap out of them.
sprawled
Yeah.
on. Will be better than that. Get to your feet, turn that corner, get that takedown. Don't rely on shooting and stalling to save you.
Yeah.
Because that's unfortunate for a striker. Now we're talking about which is even. Allowing the knees on the ground, I think, makes it more even. I don't think it gives an advantage one way or the other. Again, you could make that argument.
But
I think grapplers like to grab and hold a little too much. I'm a striker-based guy.
Shots fired.
And I will grab to
Shots
play
fired.
the rules. But
the man's a brown belt. Okay, he's not that much of a hater.
I did grappling for a long time, guys. I got the arthritis to prove it.
So back to global rules: near knockdown, near submission. Second is damage, internal, accumulated, or superficial.
Correct.
Third, you said, is striking combinations and cage ring generalship. What is fourth?
Fourth is going to be earned takedowns or takedown defense.
Okay, and I think this is a big difference between unified and
Big difference.
global. And then what is the final criteria for that?
Aggression.
Which is, I think, the standard. If nothing else happened, who stared at the other guy more aggressively?
Who looked like they wanted to actually do something despite not doing anything.
This is where I think is a massive difference between global rules and unified rules, because there is an understanding, whether that is real or that is contrived, that in unified rules, I take you down at the end of the round. Nothing else happened, but I scored a takedown. Mm-hmm. That is like a 10-8 round, because they are scoring the takedown much more effectively than they are scoring the knockdown in unified rules. Yeah. I would say that in global rules, you don't see that. The takedown is not as valued as the knockdown or the near knockdown or the submission or whatever.
And again, I encourage everyone to go read both rule sets, specifically the unified MMA rule sets, because it will say there that a takedown is nothing more than a change of positions.
Sure.
What you do with that position
then becomes the question.
Then becomes whether we're scoring it for you or not. Gaining positions, this is a kind of debatable again. Gaining positions on the ground is great in jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
Right? They score that. In wrestling, they'll score that. But when it comes to MMA,
it should not matter.
It should not matter unless you do something.
Yeah.
Even if it's a minimal, you drop an elbow or two.
Well, we got to start heading towards that winding it up time. But what I will say is that even the hierarchy of positions in MMA is a little different, right? Mm-hmm. Because in jiu-jitsu, I do not necessarily want to stay inside control, but in MMA, it probably values me a little bit more. I can usually do more damage and retain better control from side control or even half guard.
Yeah.
Where in jiu-jitsu, if I cannot get out of half guard, I cannot win the fight. It's very hard to submit from half guard. I know a lot of of the traditional ground and pound fighters that have no problem just hanging out in half and beating the donkey out of you,
And that's what, again, it's MMA. So this is where we've seen it's young, right? MMA is still young. So we see these grappler-based fighters, and they get all these takedowns, and they demand the respect of grappling and stuff. But don't forget, it's an MMA fight. You have the ability to strike. Again, even if it's a minimal amount, you have to show something worth scoring. If we're wrestling at home, and I had an older brother growing up. If my brother got on top of me, right? Whatever.
That's dominance.
Whatever. He's on top of me. But then, our mom breaks it up, and then I smack him. I got the last hit.
That's all that matters.
That's all that matters. Who got the last hit?
He's listening right now going, you're a prick.
Yeah. No. He's thinking, I always got last hit.
What are you talking about, bro?
But yeah, it's legitimate. I think again, there needs to be more discussion. I as a judge, I try not to be I'm Mr. Striker. I try to go to again based on what the scoring criteria wants us to do, which is give the win, give the points, because we got to do a 10-9 must system or 10-point must system. Give the points to the guy who's working towards the finish.
I'm going to it's another week, so I have to quote or at least paraphrase Johnny Davis. I think Johnny Davis, like the vice president of IKF, talks about this a lot, where he says that to some extent, MMA has kind of taken the best aspects of striking and they've marketed it, but they don't necessarily favor it sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? Because like when you go watch a highlight reel of the UFC, you're going to see a lot of striking, knees, elbows, punches, kicks. You're not going to see a lot of near submission attempts.
Yeah.
And when people often will say like, well, Muay Thai is not that exciting, or kickboxing is not that exciting, or I can't sell a kickboxing show, or, you know, we're not going to, you know, we're going to have an MMA event, but we fill it with kickboxing fights or we fill it with Muay Thai fights. The truth is that all of the things that fans love to watch, and we're not talking about like the experts, we're talking about the casuals, they like striking, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that so many people are going to one championship, because there's a lot of more high-level strikers that are kind of now transitioning to one championship because of whatever reason. And again, I do not want this to be like a love story for one championship. I think they're very enjoyable to watch.
But
I love the UFC for my entire life, essentially. You know,
to that point though, you were talking about one championship, but you brought up these regional shows who do fill the cards with multiple martial art rule sets.
Sure.
So it seems to me that product of kickboxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, and MMA is actually
the model.
Is a better model than just MMA.
Because that's what the regional events are doing.
Yeah.
That's what one championship is doing. Obviously, it's different, right? I mean, it highlights you because, like, you know, we've seen a lot of fights in the UFC where it is two strikers that have no intention of going to the ground.
Yeah.
And they're going to keep it standing. And they probably would have agreed to do, like, a small glove Muay Thai. And I think fans would have loved that.
Yeah.
But because they only operate in that one rule set. Now, this is where, you know, we can start to get into like controversies and misunderstandings. But this is where the UFC probably has done things better to grow their sport. Because there are so many rule sets when it comes to striking arts that the casual fan does not. It's like you get lost. Mm-hmm. Like, why isn't he doing this or why is he doing that? I think that if you want to make striking, stand-up striking, whether that is Muay Thai or kickboxing, whatever you want to call it, as big as it should be, we need a unified rule set. We need one unified rule set and one scoring criteria, and everyone needs to go to that one. Because the average fan could tell you what the rules for MMA are. Right, in the United States. If I was like, hey, what are the rules for MMA? An average fan watched a couple of fights could probably say, well, this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed. This is kind of how it's scored. They're going to use terms like damage, which are not in the rule set, but they kind of have an idea of what it is, right? The average person that has probably watched Muay Thai fights or kickboxing fights could not do that.
No.
And that's a problem for our sport, because if every time, you know, why are NFL fans so educated? Because the rules rarely change. Mm-hmm. They're always the same. And the NFL fans probably watch more NFL games than a referee does, right? Because if an NFL fan watches 3 games in a day, I guarantee you a referee in the NFL can only, you know, ref 1 game.
Yeah.
Right? So the fan's going to become more educated because they're watching it, and the rule set's the same always.
And I hate watching football. I hate most
I know this
sports. About you. But I will watch it because I'm curious to how it differs from our martial arts.
Sure.
And man, the education you get on one program is astounding compared to a martial arts event. They're breaking down plays. Again, there's a lot of pause, right? There's a lot of pause in between plays, but they're breaking it down.
Sure.
They have, intermissions where they're talking about what the team needs to do going into the second half. There's so much education going on. That's why the fans seem so educated, because they're just regurgitating essentially what is being said, to where we hear the same regurgitation in martial arts for UFC, but they're regurgitating poorly because the commentators themselves aren't being fed the best information.
Where do you think the misconceptions or the controversies? Because there seems to be a lot of debate always about judging. Where do you find that is? What's causing that, do you think?
Again, I think there's just a lack of communication. when we talk about the martial arts industry,
Sure.
right? Podcasting is a big part of that, and they get occasionally you'll get a ref on there, occasionally you'll get a coach. Of course, you're going to get fighters, but they're not bringing in other officials. For the average fan to name a judge, they're going to name the worst judge, the one that
the one that messed something up.
Yeah, everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people know Adelaide Bird because her name gets thrown around a lot. And
what was the name of the guy that Dana White wanted to murder?
There's a couple of them.
Oh, the one that what is his name? That's gonna bother me so much. And he'd miss stuff all the time, and Dana would be like, "This guy." And he eventually got kicked out of the athletic commission or whatever. But I don't remember that guy's name.
But judges aren't out there talking, and part of that is because in some of these organizations, they state that they don't want judges post fight to talk about their decisions and such. But I think that's a real misstep because, again, there's not enough education right now.
Yeah.
And until we cross that bridge to where we're talking to judges more, we're holding them more accountable, we're getting their viewpoint. I judge a lot for Combat Night.
Sure.
They use a sanctioning body that always comes to me, especially if we're in Orlando or something. And Mitchell, who is the owner of Combat Night, has nothing to do, technically, with the sanctioning body.
Sure.
But he'll still come around to the judges. How did you see that fight? Why did you see? Because he needs to know that he's providing through his sanctioning body that he hires. They're providing.
That they're doing the right job, and that they're educated and they know what they're doing.
They're at least doing their best to come up with a comprehensive decision.
Yeah, I think that this is. I think that this is one of those things that people admit to quietly, but they don't admit to in public. Or maybe I'm wrong, because I think there's a lot of machismo and stupid decision making in our industry. But 2 points. One, we alluded to this last week. I'm going to mention again. Most martial arts industry videos, podcast discussions are either on the business of running a martial arts school or on the entertainment aspect of martial arts.
Yeah.
Very rarely are we in that lane of education as a martial artist. And I think one of the reasons is because it's a smaller population. Because if we do entertainment, right, everyone will talk about everyone. There's 5 billion UFC fans. Okay, so you're gonna get a lot of people listening. If you're talking about the industry of martial arts, the business of martial arts, there's a lot of martial arts schools.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about high level coaching, that's a very small segment of people that are going to listen to that. So it's unfortunate, but I think it is very true. Now, in 2000. In the late 90s, early 2000s, I transitioned from traditional martial arts, I was doing karate, to starting to do like Muay Thai and non-traditional martial arts, and also martial arts that were more like, this is going to piss people off, adult-based. So instead of going to a class where I was the oldest kid, I was the youngest adult, if that makes sense. And the UFC had been around since 92 or 94. Vale Tudo and No Limits and all that stuff had existed prior to that. Obviously, some form of no rules or MMA style fighting has been around since the Greeks and Pancration, if not earlier than that. But in 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, there was this revitalization of the UFC where a bunch of money was pumped in. And one of the things that they did was they created the Ultimate Fighter TV series, which they paid for and had very little advertising dollars to do. And as a martial arts practitioner, that was an incredibly educational resource. Why? Because now we're seeing how high-level coaches coach or how other fighters train. Because prior to that, you probably did not see anything like that. The only videos that were being made were either instructional videos that were traditionally being made by more traditional sources, right?
Yeah.
Or these National Geographic, this is how Shaolin monks train.
Right.
And I actually still have one of those videos, and they're fun videos. But you all of a sudden now you see UFC fighters, guys that are competing for the UFC.
It's like watching a movie. It's like make believe.
Yeah. Like, oh, these are how they really train.
Yeah,
okay, cool. All right, that's interesting. And sure, it's scripted, and sure, there's drama. But hey, guys, we're going to work on this takedown. And you're actually watching the takedown on TV, going, "Oh, I see that. I didn't know that detail. That's interesting. Okay, cool. Oh, that's how." That's how Ken Shamrock teaches that, or that's how Tito Ortiz, the early guys,
Matt
right?
Hughes,
Yeah.
All those guys.
Oh, okay. This is what the life of a fighter is to some extent. Okay, because they do these behind the scenes profiles where they take the fighter back to, their hometown, and you'd see the gym, the local gym they train at.
Yeah.
The only other organization that was doing anything like that was that HBO Boxing would do lead up to the fight where they would follow the fighters, and you'd see the fighters running every day, and you'd see all this interesting stuff.
Yeah.
That did not exist. And then for like maybe about the first like early years of what I would describe as new UFC. So maybe like from the Ultimate Fighter through, do you remember the Tap Out TV series?
It was great.
Yeah.
That's where we first saw Cowboy Cerrone.
Donald Cerrone's first episode. That's where you really got to know BJ Penn, because he was a fighter, but then he was on episodes of Tap Out where they would go and they would hang out in Hawaii and they'd train, some of his up-and-coming fighters and whatnot. But you'd see, oh, this is what weight cut looks like. This is what this looks like. And then that was like, I don't want to say the golden age, but for some reason then we don't really get programming like that anymore. The only programming we have now is the Ultimate Fighter, but the Ultimate Fighter is so different now that it's much more entertainment based and much more sanitized and much more action based.
We're not learning anything.
You're not really learning stuff there.
Yeah.
This does not exist. Like, I have done courses where I go and learn how to referee, I learn how to judge, and that is very rare. B, it's kind of expensive.
Yeah.
C, the only people in that room are people that either want to be judges or referees. You rarely go into that room and see coaches that are trying to learn the rule set better.
Yeah.
And again, I think I just said this, but it is very, very expensive. Where I want to go to from there is where do you think the common controversies or the misconceptions? Why are there so many disagreements when it comes to scoring?
So, in my personal experience,
okay,
if I go to a kickboxing show,
okay,
like every fight on the card is just kickboxing.
Sure.
All the judges there are kickboxing related. So they know that sport very well. Yeah, they know that sport very well. So again, in a lot of kickboxing organizations or Muay Thai organizations, you don't see a lot of controversy behind decisions, and if there is, that's a big deal because it should be pretty simple to score those. Now, where we see most controversies are in MMA, and I think my experience, I've talked to a lot of these judges. I've lived in Vegas. I've talked to a lot. I even had a blow up one time with the State Athletic Commission because they weren't following their own rules.
Yeah.
What you learn very quickly is a lot of people, and this isn't just for martial arts, you could probably say this for any industry, a lot of people who are given authority aren't necessarily the best people for the job.
Sure.
And in my experience for the MMA side, where we get a lot of controversy, is I talk to these judges. Again, it's very kind of like, don't talk to the judges, or judges don't go out, saying things. I'm not a pro yet. I'm not going to say anyone's names and stuff. But you meet some of these judges, and you're like, why are you here? You have zero grappling experience. Or why are you here? You've never thrown a punch in a competitive setting. You don't understand how a snap of the head isn't really that big of a deal.
Yeah.
There's little things like that if you're not very knowledgeable of the sport, you probably should not be judging that sport. The big one is MMA because, again, you're getting maybe a boxing judge who's been 30 years judging boxing. Now the last 10 years they're judging MMA, but they've never stepped in an MMA gym. Yeah. They've never been in guard. They've never passed a guard.
This is such a complicated thing because I think that it's like if you were a mechanic, if you were a car mechanic and you've never driven a car.
Yeah.
That's a weird job to have.
And it's not to say you can't do it. It's just you're not getting the best experience to understand.
And also, I mean, like, I don't want to sound like I'm an ageist, because I'm not. But this would be my thing. If you are at the point where it's very hard for you to, let's say, grapple, you could still watch a lot of grappling tournaments. You could still talk to a lot of grappling officials. You could still talk to a lot of grappling experts.
You don't have
and
to
you
take
could say,
classes. You can go
explain
do
this to me.
Yeah.
You know, also, it's my understanding, and I can't say this officially or unofficially, but it's my understanding, like John Danaher, which is considered one of the greatest grappling coaches currently in the world, has a lot of injuries, and it's very hard for him to grapple.
Sure.
So if this gentleman has a super advanced knowledge of grappling and isn't able to do a whole lot of grappling anymore, it doesn't mean that you can't be involved in the sport if you have limitations. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you have to figure out a way to get continuous education. And if you're coming from, let's say, a Muay Thai background, and you start judging or refereeing jiu-jitsu, you need to do some homework, and that homework's probably going to be something you're going to pay for yourself out of pocket.
Yeah.
Because for you to develop expertise, for you to develop mastery, you're going to have to invest in your education. I have a $130,000 college education that I have to pay, right?
Enjoy that.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not a huge fan of it, but there's nothing wrong with you investing in your education. But for some reason with, I guess, these things that we consider to be like hobbies or luxuries, we're not investing in education. And often because the organization, the promoter, the organization is different than the governing body. The promoter and the organization might have a decent amount of money, and they might even be willing to pay for officials to be educated. But they would have to get the governing body to pay or, be involved in that form of education.
Yeah.
And that could feel like a bias. Like, hey, the UFC is paying officials to go do, hey, I'm going to pay you to do this. Okay, well, what's your incentive there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people probably don't know this because I see it in comments and stuff like, oh, they should fire that guy. Why did
they work for him?
They don't work for the promoters. Have to go through the athletic commission or a sanctioning body, and those businesses essentially hire the judges. They hire the officials. Now you can request whatever that does for you. You can request not to have certain people, but you can't be like, I want so and so, so and so, and so and so. No ifs, ands, or buts. They're going to give you who they give you. So that's probably a misconception that gets thrown around a lot that I see in comments. Like, why did the UFC bring this guy in? I mean, there was just recently some really bad ref stoppage in UFC that is in a town, probably it was like Texas or Tennessee, where they used a regional guy who probably was nervous as all hell being on his first UFC. So, and he makes a bad call.
Yeah.
And they blow it up as like it's the UFC's fault. And it's like, no, it's not.
And also, again, right? Like, if you're the referee that you're not getting enough ups, you're not getting enough rounds.
It's rough.
And then the UFC comes to town, but that also has a lot to do with the quality of the regional events in your area.
Yeah.
If you're in an area where they have very low quality regional events, it's even more important for you to figure out a way to get some kind of education.
Oh yeah. So this is probably our biggest takeaway as we kind of like wrap up on this idea. Again, if you guys do your own research, this is probably like a 2-hour episode, but you'll probably spend multiple hours if you really want to kind of dig into this and read every bit of literature that you can find, as I did. And we tried our best to kind of condense this as much as possible. But there is a lot to talk about and a lot to consider. But some of the big takeaways, I think, for those who are listening that are part of the sport, like you were saying, your regional promotions, contact them. Hey, I'm thinking about putting a kickboxer or a Muay Thai fighter on your show. What is your scoring criteria? Because that's going to change probably, especially here in Florida, depending on the promotion. Now, the thing that should not change is the MMA, because we're all under unified rules. Whatever state you go to, It's all unified rules. There's only one state that allows global rules, and that's Colorado.
Interesting.
And that's why one goes to Colorado.
Interesting. That's
are legalizing pretty much everything in their state.
Yeah.
So really contact your promotion. Ask them what their scoring criteria is. If they don't give you a scoring criteria, there's a chance that they don't have one.
Yeah.
And they're not letting their judges know what the scoring criteria is. You're really subjective to who the judges are.
And we've all heard the stories behind the scenes about judges going to events saying, "Hey, what is the scoring criteria here?" And them saying like, "Oh, just whoever's winning wins."
Yep.
And you're like,
legitimately,
what
guys,
do you do?
Legitimately, guys, not every organization I've judged for, but some, that is the response I've gotten. Hey, how do you guys want me in a close fight? How do you want me to call it? What is the scoring criteria? Where are we putting our numbers on? And a guy literally told me, it's pretty easy. Give it to the guy who's kicking ass. And I was waiting for that. I was waiting for the laugh.
I'm kidding.
When's the laugh?
Nope.
No, he was dead serious.
That was for real.
And he was an official. He was not just an official. He was the head official.
And you as an official, if you're listening at home, you're an up-and-coming official, you're a newer official, you really need to decide one of two things. Do you want to try to help this organization by maybe suggesting a rule set, coming in and saying, hey, this is what Glory's doing, or this is what Unified's doing, or this is what the global rule set is, or this is what One Championship's doing? Or do you want to make the decision that like you should not be an official for them, because what that's doing is that's creating a bad standard for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is also, again, as a coach, and I've said this many times and I'll keep saying this, do not put your fighters in an event where you do not understand the rule set and the scoring criteria. And my advice to you would be that when you sign up for a new organization, ask them, what if they for the link or for the information, or where can you see it written?
Yeah.
Because I do not want you to verbally tell me what the rule set is. Because if you are planning to go into an event and you're going to do Muay Thai, and then you get there and they tell you that it's K1 rules, as we discussed earlier, that's very different. Those are very different rules. Okay, so what is your expectation of the rule set? You should know that.
And then that being said, their scoring criteria could be wildly different. Just because this rule set doesn't mean that's their scoring criteria. And here's another unfortunate thing too: is the organization could have this is our scoring criteria, but maybe they didn't pass that on to the judge.
Yes, they didn't explain
that. So the
to
judge
judges.
comes in there with his own scoring criteria. One piece of advice I got when I was in the event was in California.
Okay.
And one of the biggest coaches in Muay Thai, Kieran Fitzgibbons, who runs CSA, he was kind of in the back talking shop with a lot of the coaches, and one of the advice he gave, because someone brought up decisions.
Okay.
And he said, if you really are concerned about how to win these fights by decision, you need to learn who the judges are and what the judges are about.
Okay.
That takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you'll see some of these guys, some of these coaches, they'll go up to all the officials, they shake all their hands, how you doing? Good to see you. Because you get familiar with these guys. And to learn what that judge is looking for specifically, and then what that judge is looking for specifically, and then you're also going to game plan your fighter to do that. That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
And it's very hard to do, and you're relying on a lot of things. So my advice, learn the scoring criterias. One thing I really wanted to point out about the striking scoring criteria is the importance of knockdowns. Because in all these rule sets, all these scoring criteria, at the top is knockdowns.
Yeah.
So if you're getting knockdowns, you might not get the finish, but you're leading to the finish. But if you're getting knockdowns, you're getting 10-8 rounds, 10-7 rounds. It's very hard to come back from as a losing fighter.
Yeah.
So your goal as a coach should be teaching your fighters
Knockdowns
per round.
Knockouts.
Knockdown per round, or 2 knockdowns per round. These are the goals you should be setting in your training session, not the one big knockout. That may come through the process of trying to score knockdowns.
Yeah.
But you should really focus on getting these 10-8 and 10-7 rounds. Now, when it comes to MMA, 10-8 rounds are less given. And again, I think that's a mistake. I think there should be more 10-8 rounds. I think a lot of people agree with that. But also at that point, I think there shouldn't be a 10-point must system. I like the global rules, score the fight as a whole, because MMA is so complex, just like traditional Muay Thai is so complex. They score it as a whole, not as a round-by-round decision.
Cool. All right. I think that starts to wrap up the show for the day. A couple of things I have to point out, and I'm going to do a better job of pointing this out in the future, not leave it toward the end. But one, hey guys, visit our sponsor, which is impactmouthguards.com. If you use the link in the show notes, or if when you go on the website, you click on the coupon code and you put in the one word, Combat Theory. There's 2 T's in that. Combat Theory, you'll get a pretty significant discount on a custom mouthpiece and still get a really good custom mouthpiece for around $100. Visit our website, which is combattheory.com. I have updated all of the inventory, so we have T-shirts and flip-flops and beanies and sweaters and hoodies and all that stuff that have the Combat Theory logo and the Modern American Muay Thai logos on there as well, if you're interested in that. And for the next week after this episode posts, if you use coupon code JUDGE, that's Judge, Judge, like Rich is a judge, you will get a pretty significant discount on any apparel that you want. So that's cool. We should be posting another episode, if you enjoyed this one, sometime in early October, probably around October 3rd is what I'm thinking. And we're hoping to have a guest.
Yeah, we're working on getting a guest. We have a couple people in mind, so I don't want to tease too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, we want to kind of split up.
Might be my mom. She might come on the show. I don't know. She's not important or anything, but maybe she'll cook us food.
We can get some entertainment out of that.
Yeah. My mother's never seen a fight before in her life. How is that possible? I have no idea.
But yeah, we want to kind of break it up, not make everything so educational based, but of course we'll add aspects as we go.
You can always visit Rich. Rich has a new event. October 15th is his next event in Orlando, Florida, which is with Florida PMT. And if you go on his website, which is floridaikfpmt.com, or you could visit his Instagram, which is Florida_PKB_PMT, and all the information for that new event October 15th in Orlando, Florida, and that is Point Muay Thai. If you don't know what Point Muay Thai is, go listen to the previous week's episode, and that's the whole episode's on that.
Completely different scoring criteria.
Totally different. Completely doesn't have anything to do with knockdowns, but it has to do with teaching you how to win fights. It's an educational tool, and we talked about that pretty heavily. I think that's everything. Rich, you look so much cooler now with these glasses on.
I should have done it the whole episode.
Yeah, let's look at those glasses. Where are you at? Oh, look at this guy, huh? Yeah, we should. Why didn't we do that the whole episode? That's something. All right, next time.
I'll be sunglasses rich.
Hey guys, listen, this is really important. We know there's people listening because I see the downloads and I see the views and all that, which is super cool. We have the full video on YouTube. We also have the podcast on pretty much anywhere you can watch a podcast. Guys, please reach out to Rich. Please reach out to me. Comment. Ask us questions. If you would like to be a guest on the show, and there's a legitimate reason you should be a guest, feel free to message us, man. We'll have you come on. We'd love to have you come on. Or if you have questions, or if you have ideas about what we're going to do. 2 seasons ago, we did like a Q&A episode, which I think we'll probably do again coming up pretty soon. So if you have ideas about questions, look out for that on our social media. Follow us. I am Paul_EP on Instagram, or Combat Theory on Instagram, and Coach Rich or the PKB PMT Instagram as well. All right. Hey, man. Thanks so much, bro.
Thank you.
You look really cool with those glasses on.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, man. Later.